Yeah, just say thank you, sorry. Oh, I thought you were going to go first. Okay. No, I mean, I'm still a little shaky after the film, actually. I have seen it for the second time now, and it's so physical and impressive. Yeah, don't worry, not that kind of physical, no. But in your previous film, your lead was a nun. How did you make that jump to a
nun?
Yeah,
he was nun-ish. Jump from a nurse nun to a bodybuilder?
Yes.
I mean, arguably, I think they're kind of both barking up similar trees in that they want to sort of transform themselves in different ways. So they're spiritual sisters in that sense. No, I think just after doing Saint Maud, I wanted to try something different in some ways and maybe look at a genre I hadn't. And I just thought it would be really interesting and fun to do something about a very, very muscular woman.
Yes, well, it is. And Kristen, question for you. What was it that attracted you so much to the role of Lou? I mean, obviously you're made for it, but I wanted you to speak a bit about that role and what you love so much about it.
What do you mean? I love Rose's personality so much, and I think why did I want to make this particular movie? I had a feeling in the room with this person, and ultimately, like once I actually read the script, it's just not like super normal to. How do I answer this? It's just like not the. What were you? I mean, I was going to say I felt like you were sort of basically just incredibly generous and kind of up for doing whatever. I really wanted to work with you. I mean, no, but like the genuine answer is like if I were to like answer a large scale sort of like mission statement regarding the movie, I could generate that. But to be honest with you, I just wanted to go. What do you want me to do? And I think to me it just seemed very obvious that Kristen would be amazing at being a sort of like updated version of a sort of brooding film noir anti-hero who like is haunted by her past and smokes too many cigarettes. So I was very glad she was up for it. I played a lot of aspirational characters that I don't actually believe in. And so this one was like, oh wow, this person like exists. Yeah, and they have like a family and like a sort of hateful history and reasons to like put a good feeling towards something outside of themselves versus self-love, which is such a predominantly fake idea. Like, love yourself and then everyone else will. She's perfect.
I can see that now, even better. And I don't want to leave out Katie O'Brien because unfortunately she can't be here today, and I know that it was kind of like a very, like you had Kristen in mind very early on, if I understand correctly, but then how was it to find Katie and how was it to work with her?
I mean, it was quite difficult to find. I mean, when she appeared, obviously we were all kind of incredibly relieved and kind of, you know, she was perfect for it and it all worked out wonderfully, but it was quite hard to find. We spent, you know, that was one of the bigger production sort of things. We set out, I was saying to these guys, we must find an actual bodybuilder who's also an amazing actor. I was like, this will be easy.
Yeah, because we had several actors put themselves up for the role and lots of people who were kind of fit, and they're like twiglets compared to the real thing. And I mean, I just think that scene that we've done in Vegas where she's on competing, where she completely shredded and dehydrated for that, and the other women on stage with her, they're real bodybuilders that had just competed that weekend, and the fact that you really can't tell that she's the actor in the lineup is incredible and testament of all this work that she put into the movie.
And she was there every single day and not like, wait, this freaks me out, I don't like this. Like, she's like willing to actually be present in every moment. It is an impressive feat, you know. Yeah, it was amazing. And, you know, I mean, obviously aside from the fact that she's, you know, got this amazing physicality, I think what was incredible about her performance is like just this sort of like vulnerability and sort of softness and dorkiness or something. I don't know, she just brings so much sort of nuance to it. And that duality was just very exciting. So we were very lucky to find her.
Yes, indeed. And you, Oliver Kazman and Andrea Cornwell, You've also worked on the previous film. In fact, you kind of you're having your breakthrough all together. Could you talk about what it meant to come on board for this film or develop it together as the kind of like next step? Because I understand that the first film is a big film, but this one is like big. So how was that transition for you as a team?
I mean, Andrea's, made big movies before as well. For me, it was obviously a huge privilege to have, that bigger budget and that bigger canvas, for us to be working with, such incredible people. Your budget goes up. It doesn't necessarily mean your spending power goes up by the same amount. And the more money you have, the more expensive it is to do things. But it was still an adjustment. I remember I was living with the DP, Ben Forsman, that was extraordinary work, absolutely and Ben, Blinky Ben, I call him, and I encourage you all to do the same. He came up, from being a spark and worked his way up. He knows things inside out, but he's also a bit of a grafter, and we were sharing a house that had been recently done, and when the rains came in the summer, it started leaking from the roof. And so, we got up there with a ladder that we borrowed from a neighbour and some brooms and swept it off and went to the Home Depot and started fixing it up. And then I spoke to the handyman from the garden. I was telling the line producer when I came in on Monday about it, and she went, "Why don't you just call the travel coordinator?" It's like, I didn't even know we really had that. I didn't know that was an option. So some things, you kind of go, oh gosh, we can do that, can we?
I just think films, ultimately, they're always the same. It's about the craft, it's about the moment you're creating in front of a camera with an actor and a small core team. And actually, the big ones and the small ones, they all end up in the same place of intimacy and just trying to find the moment. So actually, yeah, the scale goes up, but it's still what you're trying to do remains.
Dude, Rose was allowed to make a big, huge movie. Like, come on! It's so cool! You're not allowed to do that.
Shut the fuck up. I mean, there's so many aspects about the film that we could talk about for hours, I guess, and we don't really, we only have a very short window for Q&A today, but I really don't want to cut it off before talking about the music, because I think that really deserves a special credit too, besides many other things like editing and all this. But I'd love you to speak a bit about the music, who did the music, what was composed, like who's this person behind it, and questions.
So, I mean, the composer was Clint Mansell, who is phenomenal, and it was so exciting to work with him because, he's done a lot of really great films, but it was actually one of his earliest films, Pi, which was Darren Aronofsky's first film, which I think I saw as like a 13-year-old who wanted to make films, and was one of those ones that just really stuck with me and made me think, oh, I really want to do this. So to get to work with him on this was very exciting. And there's also a huge amount of like commercial tracks in this that we licensed. It's nearly all stuff from the 80s. We were trying to avoid the sort of temptation of just filling it with familiar mainstream 80s needle drops. So, we've got a lot of like slightly more left field ambient electronic sort of acts, quite a few German ones actually in there as well, like Harold Grotzkopf and Gina Ekström, Patrick Cowley and Cabaret Voltaire. And then so that and the score and the sound all had a kind of symbiotic thing of feeding into each other. So yeah, that's all to give up. Thank you.
The one thing I came across is because I'm not very well versed when it comes to plants and nature, so I wasn't actually aware where the title came from, and I'm not sure we all are in this audience, so I wondered if you can disclose a bit about that title and whether the title was there very early, because for me it's so haptic and it kind of belongs to to Katie O'Brien, Jackie, in the sense that she's kind of like so big.
Oh, you mean like the plant?
Yeah.
Yes, well, yes, so Love Lies Bleeding is the name of a plant, this kind of amaranthus kind of, and I don't know if people have seen it, it's like this crazy sort of big seed head thing with these big sort of beautiful kind of ugly sort of
Voluptuous, bit
Voluptuous,
scary,
yeah,
but
kind of
voluptuous.
weird seed head pod things.
Yeah.
I think initially I'd sort of briefly toyed with trying to steal the title of a book that's in the film called Macho Sluts, so it was like a brief working title for a while, and then that didn't kind of work. And so it's like, we need a certain level of melodrama. And then I heard about that plant and was like, that's the one I got.
But it was called that from the beginning, wasn't it? The very first deck was Love Lies Bleeding.
Oh yes, no, don't worry, it was always officially called Love Lies Bleeding.
So you should Google it. So just look at an image of Love Lies Bleeding, and then maybe you know.
It was our proudest moment, actually. When you Googled Love Lies Bleeding for ages, it was that bloody plant. And now it's us.
I never Googled that shit.
I was going to keep the plant.
Okay, well, there I go. There was like, oh, Love Lies Bleeding. It's a plant? I thought she came up with that. There's a song, there's a... No, I think it's a bit of a metaphor.
Yeah.
Me too.
Well, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Please spread the word. The film will reach very much soon.